66 million years ago, an asteroid slammed into Earth, killing off all the dinosaurs except for birds, of course, and 75% of all species. It was an apocalypse, but paleontologists rate it only as a 4 out of 10 on the mass extinction scale. The worst mass extinction in Earth's history is rated a 10 out of 10, happening way before the dinosaurs ever stomped onto the scene. So what was this apocalypse like? What caused it? And why did it pave the way for our existence today? It's me, and you're watching this channel. This is the story of the planet-wide apocalypse that made us possible. It all started about 252 million years ago when most of the Earth's land was squished together in a supercontinent called Pangaea. At the time, the world looked more like a giant version of dog bone with Australia as its little meaty morsel of a tail. But don't worry, the geography lesson is almost over. We'll get back to that. Meanwhile, let's talk about the oceans because they were about to turn black. Let's be clear, this isn't your typical zombie apocalypse where the dead rise up and start eating the living. It's more like a sudden corporate takeover where everything goes horribly wrong from the top down. It started with the death of the top ocean dwellers, the zooplankton. They suffered massive die-offs for reasons we don't really understand. And without their grazing, algae blooms flourished and sucked up all the oxygen. Those waters became dead zones stretching from pole to pole. But the disaster didn't stop there. The remaining zooplankton, along with clams, corals, starfish, and countless other animals suffocated in the global dead zone. 96% of marine species went extinct during this period. On land, things weren't much better. The mass extinction, known as the Permian-Triassic or the Great Dying, wiped out an estimated 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate species and 90% of all species overall. For some perspective, the COVID-19 pandemic killed less than 1% of humans worldwide. So if that were the same proportion, 90% of us would have died. It would be an apocalypse, basically. As for the survivors, they faced a world turned upside down. Their ecosystems had been devastated, and the climate had changed dramatically. If they were lucky enough to make it through, they inherited an Earth with fewer predators, lots of ecological vacancies, and no mass extinction event to blame for any problems that came their way. But the big question is, how could something that bad happen? Well, it might not surprise you to hear that the cause is hotly debated. There are three main theories: a volcanic eruption, asteroid impact, and gradual climate change. In fact, evidence for all three has been found. It's like the O.J. Simpson trial of paleontology. Each suspect has circumstantial evidence against them, but nothing conclusive. Let's look at the first suspect, the Siberian traps. These enormous volcanic eruptions began in the ocean around Siberia about 34 million years before the mass extinction. But the biggest eruptions happened after the mass extinction began. While there was a lull in volcanic activity, mountain building in the central Pangaean Mountains lifted up lots of rock. Weathering of those rocks took carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and dropped it into the oceans, making them more acidic. Low oxygen levels and ocean acidification don't mix well. Some researchers think that when the volcanic activity ramped up again, it was too much for the already stressed ocean environment to handle. The new lava released more CO2 into the atmosphere, which led to global warming. That, in turn, contributed to even more weathering, creating a vicious cycle that disrupted ocean life. Plus, the eruptions spewed out tons of toxic gases, including sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, which could have led to acid rain and poisoned surface waters. Other pollutants may have entered the atmosphere and blocked sunlight, leading to an ice age. Basically, the Siberian traps represent a classic case of too much of a good thing. They help form the supercontinent Pangaea by dooming the creatures that live there. But hold on. Another team of scientists analyzed zircon crystals from Australia and discovered that while the volcanic activity did coincide with the mass extinction, it didn't start until after the ecosystem collapse had begun. Volcanic ash and tephra layers from the Siberian traps are missing from many places around the world, including South Africa and China, suggesting that the eruptions didn't produce a global environmental catastrophe. Instead, they may have unleashed their fury on a smaller scale. The molten lava spread out across Eurasia, heated groundwater and produced massive steam explosions that shook the region with earthquakes. Those regional effects certainly could have contributed to the mass extinction, but they probably weren't solely responsible. After all, similar volcanic events have happened multiple times throughout Earth's history. The Deccan Traps in India have lava flows nearly twice as large as the Siberian Traps, and they've only caused minor extinctions. So the Siberian Traps may have played a role, but it seems unlikely that they were the sole cause of such a massive extinction. Now let's look at the second suspect, the asteroid. About 20 years ago, scientists found a crater beneath the sediment that had recorded the mass extinction. Dubbed the Chicxulub crater, it's roughly the same size as the one that killed off the dinosaurs. And it's in a similar place relative to the continents. But it's definitely in the wrong time frame. The crater is about 280 million years old, so it couldn't have caused the mass extinction. However, a few years later, another research team pointed out that the crater was actually much bigger originally. They estimate that the original impact was around 5 times larger than the one that killed the dinosaurs. If an asteroid that big slammed into Earth today, the results would be catastrophic. Planes would be vaporized in mid-flight. Cities near the impact site would be leveled and tsunamis would barrel across the globe. So it seems plausible that an asteroid could have caused such devastation 280 million years ago. And the timing fits. The mass extinction began about 1 million years after the impact. But the asteroid theory has its problems, too. A space rock that big would leave behind a lot of telltale signs, like shocked quartz and tektite deposits. But geologists haven't found much evidence of these in the rocks surrounding the crater. Plus, asteroids often leave behind a layer of iridium, a rare element on Earth but common in space. And while the rocks immediately outside the crater do have a spike in iridium, the rest of the world doesn't. Again, if an asteroid had triggered the mass extinction, you'd expect to see more evidence of its impact. So what does that leave us with? Maybe the culprit wasn't a single asteroid but a whole shower of them. New research suggests that the Chicxulub crater was formed by a comet that broke apart. Its fragments rained apocalyptically down on the Earth over a period of years or even decades. That could explain why the impact left behind relatively little evidence. Since the effects of each individual impact were relatively minor, they wouldn't have been that noticeable. But together, they caused major changes in climate and the environment, triggering the mass extinction. Scientists are still trying to figure out if this comet breakup really did trigger the mass extinction event. But either way, it's clear that comets played a role. You know what else played a role? You guys. Thanks for watching. Now let's go back to our story. Meanwhile, back in the present day, the asteroid evidence is still lacking. Supporters of the asteroid theory suggest that erosion has removed much of the evidence, or that there were multiple impacts that left behind subtle signals. But maybe the mass extinction wasn't caused by an asteroid at all. In 2022, a pair of scientists proposed that a gradual shift in ocean circulation patterns was responsible. As Pangaea began to break apart, the Gulf Stream, a current that carries heat from the tropics toward Europe, may have shut off. Without that heat, Europe and Western Asia grew colder and rainier, triggering massive volcanic activity in the Siberian Traps. But it wasn't just Europe that got hit with torrential rains. England became much wetter, which is why it's home to so many bands. The American Northwest also saw more rain, which could have devastated the dry and mountainous terrain. And Australia got so wet that it produced vast swamps. This climatic shift could have been the last straw for the struggling ocean ecosystems, pushing them over the edge and causing the mass extinction. Okay, so now we have 3 potential culprits, each with some evidence in their favor. And since they didn't leave behind a smoking gun, scientists are studying the chemistry of ancient fossils to try to narrow down the possibilities. For example, stable isotopes of carbon can reveal the temperature of the water that an organism lived in. One study published in 2023 used this technique to reconstruct the temperatures of shallow waters around the world in the lead-up to and following the mass extinction. The results suggest that the oceans warmed by around 3 degrees Celsius, which fits with the asteroid or volcanic models. But the timing of the temperature shift doesn't quite match either. The researchers concluded that the data supports a gradual onset of environmental catastrophe rather than a sudden one. Other studies like this one have reached different conclusions. It seems like the problem with solving this mystery is that we're trying to find a single cause for the most widespread extinction in Earth's history. But maybe the truth is that there wasn't one. Maybe all three suspects are guilty. Comets may have struck Earth, triggering volcanic activity that altered the climate and destroyed ocean ecosystems. While we may never know for sure what caused the mass extinction, we can say for certain that it gave rise to new ecosystems and paved the way for vertebrates to become big, scary apex predators. More specifically, it made room for the ancestors of today's cynodonts, a group that includes dogs, whales, humans, and yes, even the mighty T-Rex. Had the mass extinction not happened, who knows what ecological vacancy we might have filled. Maybe we wouldn't be here at all. So while it was an apocalypse, it was one that made us possible.